Reformers in Malaysia, what gives? My name is Adriel, and I know I haven't been posting up a video in quite a while now. And it's always a challenge sometimes to put yourself out there, because in a more Asian setting, to do stuff like that, one may be perceived as, showy. But I come to you today with a challenge or a thought to invite you to think alongside with me on this, on what really matters and what's been going on. And reformers, what gives, right? I do not know about you, but the past few months, I've been getting a lot of these questions on that this reformed church that's been bashing up other churches and saying that they're not saved, they're not Christians if you're not reformed. There is also this idea when people find out that you're reformed, there's an eyebrow raise, and they have this very cautious wariness to it. And the question is, why is that, right? Why is that? Now, the word reform is not really a Christian word, it's not really a Christian term. Governments and organizations use it when its current form is not what it's supposed to be, and hence they need to reform. And for the Christian church, when you look at church history, Reformation has been going on again and again and again, and usually it's always in the time frame of like 500 years and whatnot, from the Great Schism to the Protestantism, and so the church is always reforming. But when you talk about reformers in Malaysia, I think here's how I see it historically. There was a season decades ago where there were the spiritual scene of the churches was that the leaders were not really feeding the members with the word properly. It was lots of testimonies and very shallow teachings, and that created a generation that were not equipped enough or in terms of maturity, and that created a kickback, right, of these reformers. And this bunch of reformers that appeared came from a specific sense of theological strand, Calvinism. And Calvinism is just one of the many reformers, right? There's Anabaptist, Presbyterian, Zwingli, Lutheran, the list goes on. But now when we use the word reform in Malaysia, it is a very, very loaded word. What does that mean, right? And I feel sometimes it's even pointless to define the word now in Malaysia because of what the form that it has taken. And here, look, there's this saying that reformers tend to be too overly intellectual and too passionate to the point where they bash up other churches. Actually, it's nothing new. There is nothing new about that saying. I think a lot of reformers may come off that way. But the issue here is when they come to Malaysia and they give this teaching and they call out other leaders, and I'm saying this is not one particular church, it's a collective idea, it's a whole movement, the Young Restless and Reform. What happens, this is my observation by the way, so I'm ready to be corrected. What happens is that then they call out these leaders who are not teaching the word correctly, and then they make the mistake of associating not teaching the word correctly with the denomination. And then they make this mistake of calling out how Methodists, how Anglicans, Presbyterians are not biblical. So this is the narrative. I mean, you can disagree with me. I'm just drawing you a narrative. It doesn't have to be correct. It just have to point out what's being said. And that's the problem, because the issue sometimes is it is not about Reformed theology versus the rest of the different theologies out there. It's actually, when you look at the Malaysian scene, sometimes it's more like Reformed theology versus the lack thereof theology. And the problem is then when a biblical Methodist or a biblical Presbyterian, a biblical Anglican, and the biblical born SIBN comes in, they are accidentally labeled as Reform, right? Although Reform has certain key distinctives. And by the way, Reform also has a spectrum. There's some call themselves a 3-point Calvinist or 1-point Calvinist or whatever point Calvinist, although the purest of reformers will say there is only about 1 point that has 5 parts. The scriptures brings on this whole new mystery of theology that you can never fully know God to its maximum, but what Christ has revealed. Now, it is starting to bore me, and it's starting to frustrate me because it feels like a very isolated issue. I come with a frustration that already in Malaysia, there are times when you find, and this is in light of acknowledging God's faithfulness, that, discipleship becomes a privilege rather than a norm. And when you read the Bible, it's supposed to be a norm. Everyone's supposed to be discipled. Evangelism is supposed to happen. There are greater issues at play, and yet it is amazing how a bunch of reformers can cause such a stir. And let's be real. When we call out reformers, the truth is every other churches have the capacity and the tendency to do that. We have a season where if you don't really speak in tongues, then you're this kind of second-grade class citizens. You do not know how to use the gifts of the Spirit, and all of a sudden, people look at you as one kind. So this whole idea of not having that sense of oneness and this disunity in the church is quite apparent, and I personally wouldn't call out reformers on its own. And I know there are a lot of people who would disagree with me, but here is an idea I'm going to throw to you for you to think about it, right? I think one of the best measurements, or the better measurements on whether the person is legitimate or not, or whatever they want to call. If anyone calls themselves, I'm an Anglican, I'm a Reformer, I am a Methodist Complementarian, whatever words, whatever labels a Christian might share. And there's nothing wrong with labels, although I'm starting to come to a personal position that I'm just going to call myself a Christian unless we have a theological discussion. But whatever the Christian can call him or herself, your ultimate your ultimate measurement, will be your fruits. What do I mean by that? For example, let's just say this guy comes and says, "Hey, Adriel, I am a durian tree." I say, "Okay, cool." And then he proceeds to explain all the kinds of durian trees, what kind of durian he is, how to open the durian, what soil to use for a durian, how long to wait for a durian to grow, what is the season and what is not the season, how to care for a durian. And I spend time with you, but all I see is you producing orange fruits. No matter how much you say you are a durian tree, you're obviously an orange tree because you fruit oranges. That's the reality. So I want to just invite you to ponder along with me as we find this whole idea of reformers in Malaysia, right? Can we think bigger than that? It's just I find, reformers or not, right? I think all of us, especially myself, we make the same mistake of this subtle pride that we are the better, more mature ones, and it's starting to really be a burden on me. I do not know about you, and here's my challenge to you to go through, to think about, right? What I say today will not create a splash, I think, and no matter, even after this video, right, it's not going to create a movement. No, because these are the issues that have been going on ever since from the very beginning, right? Since Martin Luther's time, he had his counterpart here. Since Augustine, since George Whitefield and John Wesley. I can name the list again. So there's nothing new, because what we are observing is, in light of this unity of who Christ is, there will always be personality clashes, preference clashes, convictions clashes. Which means, while I understand that I'm supposed to show certain grace, in my limited three-dimensional brain, I will react to certain things and fight for certain things, and that might cause a strain with certain someone, and that's how it's just gonna be for the season. I have no better answer. What I can encourage you in is this: where Jesus gave these priestly prayers and prayed for his disciples in John 17 before Jesus went to the cross. He says this, and if I may read, it says, "May they, the disciples, all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you have sent me. And this oneness, may they be one, so that the world will believe." I will take this idea of what Francis Schaeffer, a tongue twister, will mention in what this oneness will look like. And he challenges us to remind ourselves that this oneness is actually not organizational unity, organizational oneness. Like an organization can have a really good system and processes on what everything is streamlined, everything is clear, tight, and efficient. But if internally, if there is strife, that oneness doesn't really mean much. Yeah, there can be doctrinal oneness, which is important, right? Because doctrinal or creedal oneness, what we profess to believe, demarcates the distinctives of what a Christian is. I believe in the Trinity. I believe in sin, the depravity of sin. I believe in God's sovereignty. I believe in the work of atonement on the cross. And if I don't proclaim all this, then technically I'm not really a Christian. But Francis Schaeffer says it's more than that. It is observable oneness, because the world at that point will not care what you believe. Is what they see, that oneness. And what does oneness look like? Francis draws us from John 13:34-35. Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, and then he says, "A new commandment I give to you. Love one another as how I have loved you. Hence you should love one another." This love is a sacrificial love, a love that gives your life, lays down your life for your friends, and that Jesus has exemplified that. By this, Jesus says, people will know you're my disciples when the world sees this observable oneness. It is with hope that they believe. And that's, I think, that's the weight that I have on my heart right now, that, you know, the kind where I can have a Pentecostal argue with me till the cow comes home on how the tongues is supposed to be done. I can have a charismatic argue with me about how the gifts of the Spirit is supposed to be used. I can have a Calvinist argue with me what the atonement is supposed to be like and what is not supposed to be like, and I can disagree. And by the way, reformers are also on the spectrum. I don't know whether I've said this, right? Yeah, I think I've said this. But at the end of the day, I'm able to have the capacity, knowing who I am in Christ, to say, okay, disagree already? Come, let's continue this next week, but come, let's go have a drink, right? May that non-believer say, but you just fought. Yeah, we disagreed, but what is the greater thing here? Amidst all our convictions, our preferences, and our personalities, what's the greater thing here? We remind ourselves that greater thing here is our convictions of who we understand Christ to be. That He came, He died, He rose again as Lord and King over all. So much so that Jesus says, all authority has been given to me on heaven and on earth. So much so that Ephesians 1 states that, if I may read, right, that God has made known to us the mystery of His will, according to His purpose, which He set forth in Jesus Christ, as a plan for the fullness of time to what? To one day unite all things in Him, things in heaven and things on earth. That world is not here yet. It is in the process of being here. Until that day comes, we will fight, we will disagree, and I think it's just going to be a reality. And I do not know how else to go about it, because again, it's a battle of convictions. I can only hope that you guys journey with me to ponder upon this, as you guys, who I hope you guys are listening, are the next generation of the leaders, the Christian leaders in Malaysia. But if you're living in Malaysia, that's a whole different story. He started it with Jesus. God started it with Jesus, and we are continuing it by the work of the Holy Spirit till the day Jesus comes again. And I'm looking forward to the day that I'll be so utterly humbled at this reality, where I understand the kind of oneness to its fullness, to grow in the fullness of Christ in maturity. But as for now, reformers in Malaysia, what gives? This is just my thoughts. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.